Nights in the village had always been quiet, too quiet. For 3 years I worked as the only night guard in town, pacing around a half-empty depot, sometimes making a round at the bus stop, other times sitting in a booth waiting for dawn. The loudest thing I'd hear most nights was the wind rattling loose tin on someone's shed. No drunks, no thieves, no emergencies. It should have been a blessing. But quiet doesn't pay the bills. Every evening when I came home, Maria had the kitchen table covered with papers, rent notices, utility bills, receipts stacked like battle plans. She would run her finger down the numbers, eyes red from exhaustion, and I knew before she spoke what was coming. "Jack," she'd whisper, voice trembling between fear and anger. "This isn't enough. We're behind again. We can't keep living like this." I tried the same excuses every time. "We'll manage. It's a rough month. Something will change." But nothing changed. Her silence was worse than her words. That look in her eyes, like I was failing, not just her but the kids too, cut deeper than anything I could explain. I wanted to scream that I'd done everything right, that I'd studied, worked hard, kept my head down, and still here we were, one step away from falling apart. That was when I saw it. The ad appeared almost like it was meant for me. A flyer pinned to the notice board outside the market, glossy and out of place among faded posters for yard sales and missing cats. Night guard wanted, Metropolitan Museum of History. High pay, immediate start. The listed hourly wage was nearly 3 times what I earned in the village. I read it twice, convinced I'd miscalculated. No one paid that much for watching empty halls. "Jack," Maria's voice in my head again. Bills on the table, her eyes begging for answers I didn't have. It felt like the universe dangling bait in front of me. Too good to be true, but too good to ignore. The next day I stood in front of the museum. The building towered over me, its stone facade carved with strange old symbols, its glass doors gleaming like the entrance to another world. The city roared around me. Horns, shouts, lights flashing. I hadn't been here in years, and now I felt small, out of place, like the countryside clung to me in ways I couldn't shake. Inside, the air was colder, stiller. The echo of my footsteps chased me as a man in a grey suit approached. "You're Jack," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." "You've worked security before?" "Small town. Nothing like this." "Good. You'll find this job different." His tone was flat, unreadable. He led me through echoing marble halls. Statues lined the corridors, frozen eyes following. Oil paintings glared down with cracked faces. My own footsteps sounded like an intruder's. Finally, in a cramped office, a contract waited. Neat stacks of paper, pen set beside it. I skimmed it. Standard hours, 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Payment at the end of each shift. The rate was obscene, more than I'd ever dreamed of earning. Enough to cover our debts in weeks instead of months. My hand hovered with the pen. "Why so much?" The man in grey folded his hands. "Because it is necessary." "Do you accept?" Something in his voice, cold, final, made me want to back away. But Maria's tired face burned in my mind. I signed. The man didn't smile. He slid a small leather notebook across the desk. "These are the guidelines. Follow them exactly." I opened it, expecting keys and alarm codes. Instead, neat black ink sprawled across the page. Rule 1. Cover all mirrors by midnight. Rule 2. Do not approach the sarcophagus if it whispers to you. Rule 3. If the dinosaur exhibit begins to move, do not run. Stand still until it passes. Rule 4. At 2:30 a.m., the desk phone will ring. Answer only if you hear your own voice. Do not reply. Rule 5. At 3 a.m., never unlock the West Wing, no matter who asks. My laugh cracked in my throat. Dinosaurs? Whispering coffins? This some kind of initiation prank? His eyes narrowed. Do not treat this lightly. Follow the rules and you'll leave with your pay. Ignore them and you won't leave at all. The silence pressed in around me, heavy as stone. I closed the notebook, fingers trembling. All right, I'll follow them. He studied me a moment longer, then stood. Your first shift begins tomorrow. Be punctual. Dismissed. I walked back into the city night. The notebook weighed down my pocket like a brick. Maria would be thrilled when she saw the money. She wouldn't ask questions if I kept it vague. Night guard in the city, better pay, don't worry about it. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't just another job. This was a contract with something I couldn't name, and I just signed my way in. The museum at night felt like a tomb. The last of the staff filtered out just before midnight, their footsteps fading into silence. The heavy front doors closed with a final metallic thud, and for the first time I realized how alone I really was. The notebook lay open on the security desk. Its words stared up at me like scripture carved in stone. Rule 1. Cover all mirrors by midnight. I told myself it was ridiculous. Superstition. Maybe some weird museum tradition. But the cut on my cheek from the cloth earlier still burned, and every instinct whispered otherwise. The bottom drawer of the desk creaked open. Inside was a neat stack of heavy black cloths, folded precisely as though they'd been waiting. My stomach knotted. He'd known I'd need them. I slung a pile over my arm, grabbed my flashlight, and started walking. The first mirror was in the East Gallery, an antique, tall and warped, its golden frame fraking at the edges. My flashlight beam slid across its surface, and for a second my reflection moved slower than me. Its hand lingered an instant after mine dropped. I froze, bile rising in my throat. Just nerves, I muttered, though my voice cracked. I draped the cloth over it quickly, careful not to let my skin touch the glass. One down. The second mirror hung between two portraits. This one was clearer, too clear. My face stared back at me, pale in the thin beam of the flashlight. Hollow-eyed, hair matted from sweat. And then, my reflection smiled. My mouth stayed flat, lips pressed thin, but in the glass, I saw teeth. I nearly dropped the cloth in panic. My shaking hand slammed it over the mirror, covering that wrong grin. 2 down. The third was worse, an enormous floor-length monstrosity at the end of a long corridor. The hallway stretched behind me in its reflection, endless rows of arches and shadow. Only it wasn't endless. A figure stood far down the hall in the glass, tall, blurred, motionless. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing the corridor. Nothing. When I turned back, the figure was gone. Only my reflection remained, staring wide-eyed, trembling. I covered the mirror with shaking hands, fabric slipping against the cold surface. 3 down. By the time I finished the main halls, sweat soaked through my shirt. My watch read 11:56, 4 minutes left. I hurried back toward the desk, but something caught my eye, an alcove half hidden behind a display of pottery. Inside was a smaller mirror, oval-shaped, propped against carved masks. Cold dread settled in my chest. I hadn't seen this one earlier. The surface rippled faintly, like water stirred by a breeze. My reflection swam in it, pupils blown wide. I lifted a cloth, but before I could drape it, pain ripped across my cheek. I staggered back, dropping the flashlight. It rolled, beam spinning crazily across the walls. My hand flew to my face. Warm liquid smeared across my palm. Blood. The mirror sat still, innocent, my reflection gazing back with lips curled in a faint smile that wasn't mine. Heart hammering, I forced the cloth over it, pressing until the glass disappeared. The air seemed to ease instantly, pressure lifting from my chest. I snatched up the flashlight, breathing hard. My watch ticked over to midnight. I stumbled back to the desk, legs trembling, blood dripping down my jaw. Every shadow seemed thicker now, every statue looming closer. The notebook lay open where I'd left it, waiting. Rule 2. Do not approach the sarcophagus if it whispers to you. I sank into the chair, hand pressed to the cut on my cheek. My blood smeared across the page, a crimson blur over the neat ink. That's when it hit me. These rules weren't written to protect the exhibits. They were written to protect me. The cut on my cheek had stopped bleeding, but it pulsed with every heartbeat. A steady reminder. I thought I was safe now that the mirrors were covered, but the notebook had already dragged my eyes to the next line. Rule 2. Do not approach the sarcophagus if it whispers to you. The word sarcophagus itself was enough to make my skin crawl. I remembered glimpses from orientation. Black wood, gold paint, the hollow gaze of inlaid gems. It sat at the center of the Egyptian wing like a king waiting for judgment. I wanted to believe it was nothing more than a relic, just carved wood and stone. But in this place, nothing was just anything. The Egyptian hall was colder than the rest of the museum. My footsteps echoed off the high ceiling, bouncing between towering statues of Anubis and Horus. Their jackal and falcon faces stared down, unblinking, shadows stretching long beneath them. The air smelled of dust and something dry, like sand baked under the sun centuries ago. My flashlight beam drifted across tablets carved with hieroglyphics, vases sealed behind glass, and finally, the raised platform at the center. The sarcophagus. Even from a distance, it commanded the room. Nearly 7 feet long, blackened by time, every line edged in dull gold. The carved face on the lid wore a faint smile, one that seemed far too knowing. I stopped at the rope barrier, throat dry. I remembered something the old curator had muttered earlier that day. Harris. He'd been wiping down the display glass, slow circles with a rag worn thin. His voice had been low, distracted, but his words stuck with me. Don't linger by that coffin, son. Not after dark. Some things don't sleep as deep as we'd like to believe. I'd laughed it off. Now, alone in the echoing hall, it didn't sound funny at all. At first, there was nothing. No sound but my breath and the faint hum of air vents. I let out a nervous chuckle. All mirrors covered. No whispers, no problem. Then it came. Jack. Jack. The voice was so soft I thought I'd imagined it. Just the hiss of wind in the ducts. But then... Jack, please, I froze. The sound came from the coffin itself. A muffled voice, faint but clear, seeping out from the seams where the lid met the base. And it was Maria's. My wife. My legs carried me closer before my brain could stop them. My throat tightened. Maria? Help me. Her voice cracked, desperate. It's so dark. I can't breathe. Please, open it. I stumbled to the rope, gripping it hard enough for the fibers to bite into my palms. Tears stung my eyes. How could she be here? It was impossible. But her voice, God, it was perfect. Then another voice joined. Daddy? My daughter, fragile, trembling. Daddy, I'm scared. Please, help us. Let us out. My chest collapsed inward. My hands shook violently. I stepped over the rope, boots clattering on the platform. The carved golden eyes seemed brighter now, glinting faintly in my beam. I reached out, fingers brushing the lid. Warm. The wood was warm. A pulse throbbed under my hand, faint but steady, like a heartbeat. "Jack," another voice whispered. This time it was mine, my own voice. "You've done enough running. Just open it. You'll never worry again." My knees nearly buckled. Hearing yourself beg through a coffin, it was worse than any nightmare. The lid vibrated beneath my palm. Dust spilled down the cracks. Something inside shifted, pressing upward. I wanted to open it. God help me, I wanted to open it. But the notebook's words thundered in my skull. "Do not approach the sarcophagus if it whispers to you." I yanked my hand back. The voices snapped, twisted, became guttural, inhuman. "Coward. Open it. Let us out." The golden eyes glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the pounding in my chest. The air dropped to freezing. My breath came out in white puffs. Then fingers clamped around my wrist. Cold. Strong. Invisible. Bones ground together under the pressure. My scream echoed across the hall. I ripped free with everything I had, stumbling into a statue of Horus. The impact rattled the glass cases, sent my flashlight beam spinning crazily across the room. The sarcophagus lid shifted once more, a grinding crack like stone splitting. For a moment, I thought it was opening. I bolted, down the stairs, through the hall, breath tearing from my chest. My hand burned, white imprints already forming where the fingers had squeezed. At the bottom, I collapsed against the wall, gasping. My skin throbbed with icy pain, like frost etched into bone. I forced the notebook open with trembling hands. Blood smeared across the page. "Do not approach the sarcophagus if it whispers to you." I had approached. I had listened. I had nearly obeyed. And now something inside knew my name. My wrist still burned where invisible fingers had pressed bone to bone. The marks stood out pale and white, like frostbite that refused to fade. Every time I flexed my hand, a bolt of pain shot through me. I should have gone home, should have run while I could. But the notebook sat on the desk, waiting like a promise I couldn't escape. Rule 3. If the dinosaur exhibit begins to move, do not run. Stand still until it passes. My throat dried as I read it. I laughed once, bitter. Dinosaurs, sure, why not? But after the mirrors and the coffin, I wasn't laughing long. The dinosaur hall stretched high above me, ceiling lost in shadows. Glass skylights loomed overhead, the moonlight bleeding through in pale streaks. Skeletons filled the room, long-necked giants, sharp-clawed hunters, and at the center, the monstrous king itself, the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Its bones loomed 15 feet over my head, ribs like the arches of a cathedral, teeth glinting in a permanent snarl. The hollow sockets of its skull faced forward, and though I told myself it was imagination, I swore those sockets watched me move. I walked the perimeter, flashlight trembling in my grip. Every step echoed too loud, too fragile in the cavernous space. Silence stretched. For a few minutes, I almost believed the rule was nothing but paranoia. Then the sound came. A sharp crack like wood splintering. I froze. The beam of my flashlight slid across the fossilized tail. The vertebrae shifted, bones grinding against each other, dust raining down in a slow drift. Another crack, then another. The massive skull tilted, jaws groaned open an inch, teeth clicking shut again with a sound like grinding stone. My chest seized. The T-Rex was moving. I pressed back against a display case, heart battering my ribs. My eyes fell to the notebook clutched in my fist. Stand still, do not run. I tried. God help me, I tried. But when the T-Rex's head swung in my direction, sockets locking on me, instinct took over. I stepped back, then another. Then my foot caught on the base of a smaller exhibit, and I stumbled. The crash echoed like a gunshot. The T-Rex's skull snapped toward me. The ground shuddered with a boom. As one bony foot slammed down, then another. I ran. The rule shattered the instant my legs moved. The thunder of footsteps shook the hall. Glass displays trembled, rattling violently as I darted between them. Each massive step cracked like thunder overhead, dust falling like rain. I ducked beneath the ribcage of a long-necked herbivore, scrambling as the shadow of the T-Rex passed overhead. The skeleton groaned, vertebrae grinding, as though the predator's presence pulled everything else to life. Its roar, or what passed for it, tore through the air. Not flesh and throat, but the grinding shriek of bone against bone, a banshee howl that froze my blood. "Stand still, Jack," I gasped to myself, but my legs betrayed me. I bolted from cover, slipping on the polished marble. The T-Rex lunged. Its skull smashed into a nearby display, shattering glass, sending shards flying. One sliced across my arm, hot blood spilling down my sleeve. I screamed and clutched the wound, stumbling into another corridor. I could hear it behind me, the relentless rhythm of bone smashing stone, each step threatening to bring the entire hall down. I turned into a dead-end alcove. No way out. The skeleton loomed in the entrance, massive skull lowering, teeth clattering together in a hungry rhythm. The notebook's words slammed into my head again. "Do not run." I pressed my back to the wall, legs buckling. My blood dripped onto the marble, each drop loud in the silence. The T-Rex stepped closer. The floor shook under its weight. Dust rained down from the ceiling. I forced myself still. The sockets of its skull hovered inches from my face. Empty, endless. The air stank of dust and rot. My entire body trembled, but I didn't move, couldn't move. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, slowly, the skull lifted. The massive bones turned, each step groaning with the weight of centuries. The T-Rex lumbered past the alcove, its shadow blotting out everything, until finally it moved on. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, sweat and blood soaking my shirt. My arm burned where glass had torn it, deep enough to sting with every breath. The notebook lay open on the ground. My blood smeared across the ink of Rule 3. I had broken it. I hadn't stood still, and it had nearly cost me everything. But for reasons I didn't understand, I was still alive. Not whole, not untouched, but alive. And I knew this much. Next time, I wouldn't survive another mistake. By the time I stumbled back into the security office, my arm was sticky with blood, and my legs barely carried me. The notebook sat open where I'd left it, black ink glowing faintly in the lamplight. Rule 4. At 2:30 a.m. the desk phone will ring. Answer only if you hear your own voice. Do not reply. I checked my watch. 2:27. 3 minutes. Every part of me wanted to rip the battery out of that old rotary phone, to smash it against the wall until it was nothing but plastic and wire. But the words on the page bound me like chains. If the mirrors had cut me, if the coffin had grabbed me, if the dinosaur had nearly torn me apart, then the phone would be worse. The seconds dragged. The tick of the clock on the wall was deafening, each beat like a hammer in my skull. My breath rasped, shallow and uneven. At exactly 2:30, the phone rang. The shrill metallic trill stabbed through the silence, vibrating across the desk, echoing into every corridor. I stared at it, unable to move. It rang again, and again. Finally, trembling, I lifted the receiver to my ear. "Jack." The voice wasn't mine. It was low, wet, like someone gurgling through a mouthful of blood. I slammed the receiver down instantly, bile rising in my throat. The phone rang again. I gritted my teeth, hands shaking as I answered. "Daddy?" My daughter's voice, sweet, innocent, breaking. "Please, Daddy. Come home. We're waiting. It's cold without you." My heart crumbled. Tears burned hot in my eyes. I clutched the phone tight enough to crack the plastic. "Emily." Her voice twisted, breaking into a scream that didn't belong to any human throat. I dropped the receiver like it was fire, shaking violently. It rang again. This time I didn't want to answer, but the notebook's words glared up at me. Only if you hear your own voice. The phone screamed into the silence. My body screamed with it. Finally, I lifted it again. Static. Then, Jack. It was me, my voice. Hollow, exact. Every tone mirrored perfectly. I shivered so hard the phone rattled in my grip. "You're still alive," the other me whispered. "Barely, but you're making mistakes." My jaw clenched. Sweat streamed down my face. "What do you want?" The second the words left my mouth, I realized what I'd done. I had replied. The silence on the line stretched, then broke into laughter. My laughter, a hollow, endless echo, spilling into my ear and curling around my brain like smoke. "You shouldn't have spoken," it said, voice suddenly wrong. Too many tones stacked together, like a chorus of me's. "Now I can tell you things." The walls of the office seemed to vibrate. Shadows lengthened, stretching unnaturally across the floor. "I know how it ends, Jack. You think you'll make it until morning, but you won't. They never do." Blood burst hot from my nose, dripping down onto the desk. My free hand clawed at the wood, nails scraping deep grooves. "Your wife doesn't believe in you. She's waiting for you to fail. And your children, they already know you can't keep them safe." "No," I gasped, shaking my head, but the voice drowned me out. "You'll stand still and still be seen. You'll close your eyes and still be watched. And when the West Wing door opens, oh Jack, you'll beg to let them in." I slammed the receiver down with all my strength. The phone screamed, vibrating so hard it nearly slid off the desk. My nose bled freely, vision swimming red. I shoved both hands against my head, praying for the sound to stop. Finally, after what felt like years, the ringing cut off. Silence crashed back, heavy and suffocating. I staggered to the bathroom, clutching the sink as blood poured from my nose. My reflection in the cracked mirror, still covered by black cloth, trembled beneath the fabric, as if the glass wanted to laugh at me. I wiped the blood away with shaking hands. My pulse pounded so loud I could barely think. When I returned to the desk, the notebook waited. My blood had smeared across the page, across the words I'd already broken. "Do not reply." And yet I had. The hollow echo of my own voice lingered in my skull. And I knew, whatever I'd let in during that call, it wasn't finished with me yet. I knew the exact second the hour changed. It wasn't just the tick of the clock or the drag of time. I felt it in the building, like the museum inhaled after holding its breath all night. 3 a.m. The words on the page were simple and absolute. Rule 5. At 3 a.m., never unlock the West Wing, no matter who asks. My hands were shaking so hard the notebook fluttered. My ribs burned. Dry blood crackled in my ear when I swallowed. The cut on my cheek pulses like a second heartbeat. I had nothing left to give, nothing but the rule. The corridor to the West Wing was longer than I remembered. Or maybe the light just didn't want to reach that far. My flashlight felt sick in my grip, the beam thinning and bowing as if the darkness could bend it. At the end of the hall stood the double doors, black oak, iron-banded, heavy hardware dark with age. Even before I got close, the cold pooled around them, the kind of cold you feel in your teeth. The first knock came like the strike of a judge's gavel. I stopped dead. The sound rolled down the corridor and through me, a measured, deliberate rap that knew exactly where I stood. "Jack?" Her voice came through the seam where the two doors met, soft, frayed, and warm enough to make something inside me break. "Jack, it's me." "Maria," I breathed. My chest clenched. I hated how small I sounded, how quick I was to believe. "Please," she whispered, as if pressing her lips right up to the wood. "You've done enough." Open the door. The notebook trembled in my hand. No matter who asks. I tried to swallow, and the motion tugged at the dried blood on my cheek, stinging bright. I took 2 steps closer. A smaller voice chimed in, higher, trembling. "Daddy?" My throat closed. "Emily?" "Daddy, it's cold," she said, and I saw her in my mind exactly as she'd be, hair tangled from sleep, too big sweater swallowing her little shoulders. "Please, let us in." The keys at my belt felt suddenly heavier, as if each one gained a pound. My hand drifted toward them. I closed my fingers until my knuckles ached. "No matter who asks," I whispered, like a prayer, like a charm against the dark. From the other side, my wife exhaled. The sound came through the door like fog. "I know the rules frighten you," she said gently. "I know you think this is a test. It isn't. It's punishment. For all the times you weren't enough. Open the door and come home." Shaking, I glanced to the right. A waist-high display stood near the doors, a pane of glass polished to a mirror shine. In it, I could see the corridor and myself, a pale man with a ruined face clutching a little black book. In the reflection, the door swelled with shadows, not shapes I recognized. Tall, too thin, bodies that bent wrong. I didn't turn. The reflection was enough. Another knock, louder. The iron straps quivered. Dust sifted from the lintel in a fine grey curtain. A third voice joined, older, steady. "Son." I forgot how to breathe. "Dad?" He'd been dead for years. Still, the voice was perfect. Calm in the exact way you learn to be when your boy is scared and pretending not to be. "It's all right now," he said. "You've done your part. I'm proud of you. Open the door." My chest heaved. Something about the way he said proud put a blade in me. I'd waited my whole life to hear that word, and the night chose now to give it to me. The iron handles slid. Not a trick of the eye. Metal moved with a low whine, as if ghost hands gripped from the other side. The chain that bound the 2 rings together pulled taut and sang. I forced my gaze back to the display glass. The reflection did not show my wife or my father. It showed a crowd pressed close to the gap between the doors, their faces smooth like melted wax, their hands too long. They turned their heads in unison, cocked at angles that would snap a human neck, and every one of those faceless faces focused on me. I staggered backward. My boot heel clipped the edge of the display, scraping across the floor loud enough to make my own skin flinch. The faceless in the reflection flinched too, as if the sound hurt them or tempted them. "Jack," my wife said quietly, as if she heard my feet. "Our son is crying. He needs you." I gripped the chain. It thrummed under my fingers with a low, living vibration. The links were cold enough to burn. "You're not them," I said, and I hated how breathless I sounded. Silence pressed back, thick and careful. Then the building shifted. Somewhere deep in the museum, a relay clicked. The overhead lights dimmed to amber, and then deeper, until the corridor was bathed in the kind of red that lives behind your eyelids. The emergency fixtures hummed awake. A tone chirped from a speaker in the ceiling, soft, official, like the start of a fire drill. A man's voice followed, calm and broadcast smooth, dopplered by a cheap PA. "Attention staff, this is a routine systems test. Please ensure all fire doors are unlatched. West Wing must be accessible for inspection." The page scraped at my nerves with the exact, bland authority that makes you obey before you think. The museum wanted to wear a uniform and a clipboard for me. "No," I said out loud. "No." The PA clicked again. "Security, Jack, comply." Hearing your name in an empty building hurts. It felt like a hand on the back of my neck. I didn't move. Behind the doors, something moved instead. The wood swelled outward, under invisible weight, a slow, obscene bulge. The iron straps bowed, creaking. The chain snapped taut and groaned an inch, dragging across the rings with a grinding shriek. The right-hand door flexed enough that I could see a seam of darkness widen between them, a thickness of night somehow more black than the unlit hall around us. The smell came next. Not rot, not damp, something older. The breath of closed rooms and sealed things, the musk of dust that never sees light. It kissed the back of my throat and made my eyes water. "Open," my wife said. The word scraped now, too round in the middle, too sharp at the ends. "Please." I wrapped both hands around the chain and leaned back with my weight to keep the doors from parting. The links bit my palms through cracked skin. Warm wetness slid under my fingernails, first sweat, then blood. From behind the door came a sound like fingernails skittering over wood. Exactly at shoulder height, then lower, then higher. A map of something feeling its way along. "Let me help you," a new voice said, smooth, measuring. The man in grey. "You misunderstood the page, Jack. The test will end if you open the door. That is all. No harm, no consequence. You can clock out early." I stared at the reflection instead of the door. The crowd in the glass pressed closer to the seam, elongated hands searching for gaps. The first row still had no faces at all, smooth ovals like unpainted mannequins. But in the second row, skin was learning to remember. Shapes where eyes should sit, a hint of mouths. In the third row, I went cold from scalp to heel. In the third row, one had my face. Not perfect. The jaw was too narrow, the mouth too soft. But the eyes were mine, and they moved the way mine move when I'm trying not to show fear. The not me lifted its hand, long fingers with too many joints curled, beckoning. "Jack," it said. My voice, warm and weary and pleading. "It's just this once." The chain bucked. I felt it in my bones. The right door jerked another inch, enough that the seam broadened to a black tongue licking the hall. I set my feet, pulled the chain tight across my chest, and arched back. The links ground into my sternum, cracking old bruises. Pain flashed white behind my eyes. "No," I said between my teeth, "not tonight." The faceless row trembled with a disappointment that looked like hunger. The not me smiled. When I smile from fear, one corner of my mouth lifts higher than the other. It did that, and the familiarity almost broke me clean in half. "Think of your kids," it said. "They need you to be brave." It felt like truth. That was the trick. It felt like something I would say to myself. The PA clicked again. "Security override granted," the false voice announced. "Releasing West Wing lock." The iron bolts didn't move. The chain didn't fall. But all at once the pressure doubled. The doors bowed hard enough that a crack zipped along a seam in the oak, a quick, snaking vein of splintering sound. Something slid into the widening gap, a fingertip as black and glossy as oil, so thin it barely looked real. It hooked the edge of the door and pulled. The oak moaned. The hinge screamed. I couldn't outmuscle it. I wasn't even sure I could slow it. "Jack," Maria whispered on the other side, but she didn't sound like Maria anymore. The consonants were wrong. The breath under them came from too many throats. "You promised me you'd do better." I could taste copper. My teeth had cut my lip without asking me. The chain trembled under my weight. In the reflection, the not me leaned close to the seam and breathed out. The glass fogged from the inside, a faint oval of vapor that printed itself like a kiss. I closed my eyes because I knew what would come next. "Open," my father said, and this time I heard the cigarette in his voice, that old rasp he never could hide. "I'll be proud of you if you do." I made a sound that wasn't a laugh and wasn't a sob. "You don't get to say that," I told the wood. "Not now." The power went. The red emergency lights blew to darkness, and for a second the world became sound alone, chain singing, oak groaning, breath whispering against wood. Then a different red stuttered to life in the ceiling, slower, deeper. It pulsed like a heartbeat. With each beat, the seam of darkness swelled. The notebook on my belt thrummed like a live thing. The urge to drop the chain and grab it was sudden and total, a reflex, to cling to scripture when the walls come in. I didn't dare let go. If I let go, there wouldn't be time to pick anything back up. "Okay," I said to the dark, and I didn't recognize my own voice. "You want me to fail? You want me to think the rules are flexible? They aren't." The not me tilted its head in the glass, curious, as if testing whether I truly believed that. It raised its hand again, and this time I saw my wedding ring on the wrong finger. Another detail wrong, another stitch showing. Outside the doors, the crowd breathed in, and the wood breathed out. Pressure built so brutally, my shoulders slipped an inch, my boots skidding. I screamed from someplace low and animal. The chain cut deeper, skin tore. Warmth soaked my palms, then my wrists. A bright sprinkle pattered on the marble, my blood dripping steady as a metronome. "Please," the children cried. The plural landed like a hammer. "Daddy, we're scared." "Please, let us in." Somewhere beyond the doors, others joined. Steps in the west wing that had been dead for centuries. A whispering like reeds in a night wind. The faint chime of something small and metallic rolling. Keys? My keys lifted against my belt. I felt them rise before I saw them, tugged upward by nothing. The ring slid, one key dragging free, then another. I bit down on a shout and jerked my hip hard, slamming the keys against the door to knock them back down. The not me smiled wider, skin stretching a fraction too far. "You can't hold them forever." It was right. My muscles quivered. Heat and ice knit in the tendons. Spots danced in my vision. I needed something more than will. "Jack," the man in grey murmured in the PA voice. Serene, unhurried, like a physician at a bedside. "The rules are a living document. They can be changed. I can authorize it." Something in me steadied at that, not with comfort, but clarity. There it was, the lie dressed as permission. The museum didn't only test discipline, it tested faith. I opened my eyes and turned my head, the minimum angle, back to the reflective glass. The crowd pressed to the seam like fish to aquarium acrylic. The first row was beginning to learn the idea of eyes. Dark little pits budded under the skin. The second row had eyes now, but they were the wrong color, too pale, like pearls set in meat. The third row, the not me, the smug echo with my crooked smile and wrong ring, raised its hands as if to show me they were empty. "Look," it said. "Nothing in them. No tricks, no claws." And then it mimed a gentle, patient gesture. "Turn the chain, let it slip, just this once." I closed my eyes again. I pictured Maria at the kitchen table, not the voice outside, but my wife, hair pulled back and a pencil stuck in it, chin in her fist, columns of numbers marching like an army she couldn't stop. I pictured Emily asleep on the couch with a book on her chest, one sock off, heel dirty from the yard. I pictured my boy's sticky hands, jam on his cheeks, the gravity of small fingers wrapped around mine. "You don't get them," I told the door. "You don't even get to wear their voices." The building pushed back. I screamed without sound and leaned with all the weight I had left. My knees slipped. The chain scythed. For a split second, the seam gaped half an inch wider, just enough that a second finger could slide in beside the first. Black and thin and jointed wrong. It hooked and pulled. "Open," 100 mouths said, and their consonants didn't line up. The notebook at my hip bucked like a kicked animal. It snapped open. Pages flipped in a wind that didn't move my hair. The paper fluttered with an urgency that was almost speech. And on a page I hadn't seen, Between Rule 4 and 5, in a hand I didn't recognize, 4 inked words glowed like fresh blood. Hold the chain. Bleed. I barked a laugh that hurt me and them both. You could have led with that, I rasped. Then I did what the page told me. I pulled so the chain bit tendon and bone, so the iron cut skin to meat, so the blood poured hot and slick. I let it run down my wrists and drip steady to the threshold. The first droplets hit the seam and hissed. The fingers flinched, recoiling like I'd scolded them. The pressure eased the tiniest fraction. I shifted grip, set the chain deeper in ruined palms, and bled onto the seam again. The sound that answered wasn't a human sound. It was old and offended. Stop, the not me pleaded, voice breaking. And that was the tell, the first time it ever pleaded like me instead of instructing like them. Jack, please. Not tonight, I said, and leaned. We hung there, me with everything I had left, and the West Wing with all the leverage of a house, and something began to change. Not the pressure, not the cold, not the humming red light. Inside me, the animal terror that had ruled the night began to stall, like a bad engine losing fuel. Not gone, never gone, but quieter. In the space where panic had been, something else sat down. Stubbornness. I can do one night, I told the doors. I can do one more minute. I can do this again. The PA clicked. Final notice, the false voice said, but it sounded thin now, stretched. Release the West Wing. Pass, I said. The seam shrank an inch you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. The fingers wriggled, panicked, and withdrew altogether with a squeal that didn't come from any throat. The iron straps sighed back to their old curve. The chain stopped singing and settled into weight. The oak, stubborn oak, returned to square. The red heartbeat in the ceiling steadied, softened, and went still. I didn't let go, not right away. My hands were fire and knife. My chest jacked air too fast. I stayed with the chain until the corridor learned to be a corridor again, until the reflection in the display showed nothing but me and the door, and a floor wet with my blood. Then I eased my grip an inch at a time, expecting a last lunge. When none came, I slid down the wood and sat on the marble with my back to the door and my palms open in my lap. The skin across each was chewed to ribbons. Blood puddled by my hips. My boots skated when I tried to find purchase. Somewhere in the physics of the night, I was a deer trying to stand on ice. The minutes between 3 o'clock and dawn were longer than any others ever carved into a clock. I didn't move, didn't speak. The PA stayed dead. The does stayed doors. The museum, sulking, licked its teeth in other rooms. When the east windows finally took a first thin breath of light, I cried without tears. My body had no water left. My cheeks went through the motion anyway. I checked the reflection one last time. No crowd. No, not me. Just a man who looked like he'd walked out of a war he didn't remember signing up for. The watch on my wrist ticked towards 6. Somewhere up front, a lock turned with an ordinary metal sound you could trust. Footsteps, the real cadence of a person who weighs what a person weighs, crossed the marble. The man in grey appeared at the far end of the corridor, immaculate as if the night had not bothered to touch him. He took me in. The blood, the chain burns, the ruined palms, the way my shoulder still pressed lightly against the door even now. His mouth made the shape of approval without ever being a smile. "You held," he said simply. My voice came out sanded down. "You said the rules pay." "They do." He gestured, and another envelope appeared, thick enough to look like a mistake. He set it on the floor, careful not to step in the blood. "You will need bandages and protein." I stared at the envelope, then at him, then at the seam between the doors, now just a seam. "I didn't open," I said. It sounded like a question. He tilted his head. considering me with the curiosity of a scholar observing a creature that ought not to exist. You didn't. Then why do I feel like I lost something anyway? He looked at my hands. Because extraction has a cost. Silence stood with us. The building listened to see what we'd say next. I swallowed. The rules, yes, they change. He blinked once, slow. Sometimes. Do they change for me? I asked. A polite pause. They change for the night. If you return, you will be informed. By you? I said. Or by it? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. We both knew who did the informing here. I held, I said again, because I needed to hear it aloud one more time. You did, he said, and for a heartbeat, something like admiration warmed the edges of his voice. Better than most. I hauled myself to my feet using the door, because I'm an idiot, because I'm sentimental, because I wanted the last touch of the night to be a thing I didn't let beat me. My legs wobbled. I took 2 steps and picked up the envelope with fingertips that didn't want to close. It was heavy enough to tilt my balance. At the edge of the corridor, I turned back. The West Wing watched me without eyes. The chain lay still. See you tonight, Jack. A voice breathed. Mine, or not mine, or the museum's dream of mine. I didn't look for where it came from. I had learned which reflexes to starve. I walked toward the front doors and a sunrise that had the decency to be ordinary. Behind me, the building did not exhale. It didn't need to. It had all the time in the world. And if the rules changed, well, so could I. I'd learned to bleed on command. I could learn the rest. The morning light didn't belong inside that building. It slid in weakly through the high glass panels, painting long stripes across the marble floor, but the shadows swallowed it whole. The museum would always own the dark. I stood in the entry hall, swaying on my feet. My palms burned like open wounds. Blood dried in black flakes that cracked every time I flexed my fingers. My cheek still throbbed where the mirror had cut me, and my arm was wrapped in strips of my own shirt to hide the gash from the glass. But I was standing, alive. That word meant more than anything else in that moment. The man in grey emerged from the hall behind me. His shoes clicked in measured rhythm, each step precise, as though he'd practiced walking across marble all his life. Not a speck of dust touched his suit. He looked like he'd never been in the same night I just survived. You held, he said again, the same words he'd spoken in the West Wing. That is, commendable. I wanted to collapse at his feet, scream at him for not telling me how close I'd come, beg him to explain what the hell this job really was. But all I managed was a hoarse laugh. I thought I was dead, I said, voice rough. Every hour, every damn minute. He tilted his head. That is the correct way to feel. I stared at him. Correct? He nodded. Fear is survival. Those who forget it do not last. My legs gave out, and I lowered myself onto the nearest step. The envelope he'd given me felt like a brick in my pocket, heavy enough to anchor me to the world. I pulled it out with trembling hands. Inside was more money than I'd ever held. Bills stacked neatly, crisp and new, enough to drown every overdue notice on our kitchen table. Enough to make Maria stop looking at me with that mix of pity and anger. Enough to feed the kids, pay rent, buy us breathing room. The sight of it made my chest ache worse than the wounds. This could change everything, I whispered. The man in grey adjusted his tie. Yes, that is the point. I shoved the envelope back into my pocket, heart hammering. So that's it? I did it. I followed the rules. I'm alive. I can come back tonight and the next and keep earning. He regarded me with something almost like amusement, though his face never cracked. "You believe that surviving one night means you are prepared for all nights?" I swallowed. "Isn't that how it works?" He stepped closer, and for the first time I realized how tall he was. His shadow stretched across the marble, long and sharp. "No, Jack. The rules are not stone. They are not commandments carved forever into the wall. They change." The words dropped into my stomach like ice water. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasp. "Change? Every night is different," he said. "The mirror may smile sooner. The coffin may call with other voices. The dinosaur may not leave you space to breathe. The phone may ring longer, louder. The West Wing may ask with a face you cannot refuse." He leaned down, his voice lowering until only I could hear. "And sometimes there are new rules entirely." My mouth went dry. "So no matter what I do, it won't ever be the same." "Correct," he said softly. "Predictability is death here. Adaptation is survival." I sat frozen on the steps. My hands ached, my chest still rattled from the effort of holding that chain, and every instinct screamed to run far, far away. But another voice, the one that belonged to Maria, to my children, to the kitchen table drowning in bills, rose louder. This envelope in my pocket was more than paper. It was proof I could finally be enough. I looked up at him, forcing steadiness into my voice. "I did survive. And I will again." His lips curved, not into a smile, but into something colder. Approval, maybe. Curiosity. "Many say the same," he murmured. "Few prove it." I pressed my palms against my knees, ignoring the pain. "I'll prove it." Silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of the waking city outside. Finally, he straightened. "Then report back tomorrow night. Punctuality is expected. And Jack." "Yes?" His gaze locked on mine, dark and endless. "Bring stronger hands." He turned and walked into the shadows, his steps fading until the building swallowed him whole. I stayed there on the steps, watching the first real sunlight spill through the doors, spilling across my ruined hands. My chest ached, my head pounded, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Conviction. Maybe I was bleeding. Maybe I was broken. Maybe the rules would change tomorrow and eat me alive. But tonight, I had survived. And as long as I could keep doing that, my family would never have to know how close I came to not coming home. I clenched the envelope, whispered to myself, "I can do this." The museum loomed behind me, silent, patient, and I knew it was listening. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more. This is Midnight Jack, wishing you a safe night.